So these are all the supplies you're going to need for mordanting. I have Alum Lactate, which is my personal choice of mordant for using on linen. And then I have the whisker and this, which is what I use to mix and dissolve the mordant in hot water. And then you're going to need a scale, a measuring cup of sorts, and then a spoon that you do not ever use with your food. And then you'll need a big pot. This is what you're going to actually do the mordanting within. You're going to want a lid on it to just save energy and be able to control the heating up process. And then some sort of big mixer that can kind of really reach down and move your fabric easily. I find that this is one of my favorites because of the pointy tongs. It just helps me grab and move the fabric easier. And then you're going to want rags. Honestly, I use tons of rags in my mordanting and dyeing process just to place these on, to lift the hot lid off, clean anything up. So you're going to want all of these tools. And again, they do need to be dedicated merely and only to your dyeing process because it will not be safe for you to use these for any type of food that you will ingest after you've used them to mordant and dye. This is a 42-gallon pot that I'm going to be using to dye over 1,000 grams of fibers. And what I'm going to do here is first empty this out. So the fabric has been scoured and it has sat in water overnight. You need to wet out the fibers before doing any of the next processes, otherwise it will uptake unevenly. And oftentimes you can reuse this water. Okay, so that's that. And then we're gonna put really hot water in here because you want the mordant to heat up and bind to the fabric really quickly. And so now we are going to be using Alum Lactate. This is my chosen method of mordanting. Mordanting is what helps the dye molecules bind to the fiber. And Alum Lactate is really good for all natural fibers, such as linen, like I use. And yeah, it's really safe. It's really natural. It's alum, which is aluminum. It's the main binding factor. And all of these are really safe and biodegradable and non-toxic. Lactic acid is something that comes from like sugars. So you definitely don't want to breathe in the particles, just as, you know, you don't want to like eat essential oils. Because when things are natural, even though it's natural, they are really condensed forms and can be harmful in certain ways. And, you know, I've learned that the hard way with essential oils, that's for sure. So you want to take 10% of the weight of fabric. So weighing your fabric is super important. And these two pieces of fabric I'm doing are about 1,000, a little over 1,000. So I'm going to be doing 105 grams of mordant. And I'll reuse the pot with water and this mordant in it for at least 2 more times after this. And so the next ones that I put in, I'll only add about 50% of the weight of fabric of mordant rather than doing, or I'll do like 5% instead of 10 because there'll still be some of this mordant left over in the dye bath from before, which is great. Okay, so I want 105, 107, 106. You don't have to be so exact, but it's nice to say if this stuff is pretty sandy. So then what I like to do is dissolve it in a little bowl or a smaller pot first. Because when you have clumps, it creates uneven dye jobs. So you really have to be careful about clumps with mordanting, clumps with dyeing. You have to make sure you rinse it properly. Otherwise, there are little speckles. And you know what? That's also, in my opinion, okay if that happens, as long as the color still turns out really bright. I just kind of see it as birthmarks and just part of the natural dye process. So we'll put just a little bit of hot water in here. And actually this pot's so heavy, it's so hard to lift. And it's full of water. So I'm gonna fill it a little bit more, but sometimes I just move it onto the stove and go from there. So now we're gonna mix it. I just use a whisk, and also all of the pots and all of the tools that you use to mordant and dye with, you will never cook with again. So you need to have separate dye pots and utensils and keep them away because, like I said, it's still concentrated forms of these products, and that can cause harm. But when it's all done and on your skin, it's incredibly nourishing. So you see I've got it mixed in there. The mordant usually dissolves pretty easily. So I'm just gonna add it into here. Into the big pot. Give it a little mixy mix. I'll rinse this out and add more water just to make sure we get it all. Boom. Chakalaka. Also, you can and probably should wear a mask when you're using that, because the particles do fly in the air. You don't want to breathe them in. Okay, now this is a trick. Dyeing is definitely really hard on your hands. Actually, my knuckles and everything starts to hurt. I'm like, am I getting arthritis? But it's fine. Just gotta stretch and exercise them proper. So then what I do is put it on high heat. For mordanting, you want to bring it up quick and fast for the bond. So you'll do that. And there's also just a little FYI that you can research more. Maybe I'll do another video when I use this process, but a lot of people use a tannin before, especially for certain colors. There's some dyes that can really benefit from it that are a little trickier, such as like logwood and stuff like that. And it really is beneficial to do a tannin, which helps the mordant bind to the fiber even more so. But I choose to not always use that step, especially if the dye that I'm going to use is high in tannins. So dyes that are high in tannins, for example, is like Kutch and yeah, just some various barks and stuff like that. So like black tea is high in tannins. So that's always a good dye choice because all of these steps help the color stick, and it helps with light fastness, which means it won't fade as quick in the light, and wash fastness, which means it won't wash out so fast. So then I pour it in here, and let's just see. You want the fabric to be able to move around easily, and I always do ventilation. So when it's winter, I usually just do this fan up here. But in the summer, it's so nice to just open all the windows, or even dyeing outside is really great. So you can see in here, sorry, I gotta figure out how to use this camera angle. You want to mix it. You don't want all these folds to happen. You have to mix, honestly, every 10 to 15 minutes throughout this process. And you just want to make sure it's moving freely, or the folds and crevices aren't going to dye and bind properly. And if it doesn't do it proper in the mordant, it's not gonna attach the same in the dye. So each step is really important, to be slow and aware and just present with the process. And you know, it's easy for me to get sidetracked doing some other business stuff and forget to come stir it. So if you need to, just like set an alarm. So that looks good. I'm gonna put this other piece in. This is a twill weave. I think it's about 160 grams. So it's kind of like a medium weight. This is actually my first time using this specific weave, so I'm super excited. It's really soft and nice. You can kind of see simple I'll be making an outfit out of each piece of these. So it looks like to me we just need a little more water. I don't want it to be super crammed, so you gotta just find the balance of not overwatering it so that it doesn't stick as well, but also not underwatering it so that it's too crowded and crammed. But yeah, basically that's that for mordanting. So what you're gonna do is put it on high heat, and you're gonna have your thermometer that you keep measuring. So I do put the lid on and save energy and heat that way, so it heats up quick. But if it gets too hot and you're not paying attention, it'll start to boil over. So it's really important that you pay attention every 10 to 15 minutes. Stir it, check the temperature. For linen and cotton is also similar in the ways that you dye them. You want to bring it up to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to hold it there for an hour, and then you'll turn it off and let it steep. You can let it steep overnight, but you need to make sure you're stirring it, because I find when I let stuff steep overnight, if I don't stir it enough, it gets those clumps that I don't like. And if you use a tannin, I'll explain this in a video with the tannin, but if you use a tannin, it is a little bit different. You don't have to keep it in the pot as long because the tannin helps it bind quicker. But this is the method I'm using, and that I use most often is to just heat it up to 200 and then hold it there for about an hour, and then leave it in the pot until the fabric's cool enough to touch. And then I like to rinse it out as soon as I can. There's times where I leave and I do have to leave it overnight, and that's fine. The fabric always gets these little bubbles. You kind of just have to like play with it until they escape and find their little air pocket to get out of. It's okay if some are sitting on the top, but it's better that everything is underneath, getting the dye that it needs. In this case, the Mordant. So yeah, now it's all submerged. What I will do is take my thermometer so I can show you guys what it looks like. I really like this thermometer, City Infrared. I have used before the ones that go in the pot, but it's way harder because you can't really put the lid on. So it's harder to monitor the temperature. So it just goes in here like that, and you can see it's at 127 to start because I started with pretty hot water. So just push this down, put the lid on, and come back in like 10 to 15 minutes to check on it. Woo! That's your first time mordanting. Great. Go get it. Go for it. Natural dye. Love it. So you can see that it bubbled to the top. I was just in the other room and started hearing the water spilling over, and that usually tells me that it is at the right temperature. So at this point I come stir it, get it all back underneath because a lot of air bubbles come in, and I turn the temperature down. And I do still keep the lid on. Sometimes I crack it a little bit because it will keep heating up. And I just want to keep it at the right temperature now. So you can see now it's at 194-ish. It changes based on, you really have to stir it and then take the temperature, because that will give you a more accurate reading. Otherwise it can, just take the fabric or the top layer. So we'll kind of keep stirring, kind of get it in this pocket of water, and you can see it's about 195, 190. So I would, anywhere from, I want it to get close to 200, but anywhere from about 180 to 200 is kind of when I start timing my hour. So now it's 116, so I will keep it heating until about 215, which is literally perfect. So that's when I have to leave. And so yeah, I just kind of push it down. You really got to get a good stir. I honestly love, this is my favorite stick, whatever you call it, stir. I just got it at a thrift store. And also, thrift stores are great when you're just starting out to look for pots and utensils, because these bigger pots are definitely an investment and can be spendier and is worth it. I've tried many different pots. I've ordered many pots, returned many pots. But if you're just starting out, whatever you can find is good. This pot is aluminum, which some people would say, don't use that. It can change color or whatever. But I like to use the aluminum pot because I feel that the aluminum gives it an extra mordanting effect. Some aluminum is the powder that we're using. So yeah, that's that. So now I'll keep stirring it every 10 to 15 minutes and we'll keep the heat on. I turned it down to about medium now. Sometimes I just leave it off like that and turn this fan on so that it doesn't boil over again. But usually just a teeny crack and turning the heat down will do it. And then we'll be back in an hour. Woo! So it has now been an hour at being at a temperature of about 180 to 200 degrees. So I'm just giving it a stir again. And you do really want to stir it really well and really kind of flip it around. Make sure it's not all tangled up because that's really easy to happen. And then I will put the lid on or crack it slightly and now let it sit and cool down. And then once it's cool enough to handle, we will come back. Okay, so now we're ready to take the fabric out of the Mordant bath. It did steep overnight, which I don't always love to do, but I had to leave it in for a little bit, so it's okay to leave it, but you do want to stir it frequently if you do that. So I have my gloves and I just squeeze it and transfer it to another pot. And then we will go rinse it. I try and squeeze out as much as possible because I'm going to be reusing this dye bath to mordant more fabric. It does get really heavy based on the amount of fabric I use. I do dye quite a bit of fabric at a time. It's usually 2 to 3 yards, but you can also do this with already made clothing like t-shirts and dresses. But if you do that with already made stuff, sometimes the creases of where it's been sewn don't dye evenly. So that's why I dye the fabric before I sew and create the garment. Welcome to my basement washing room sink. So this is where I wash everything. It's nice to be able to reach into the tub. I try and use as big of a container as I can to wash it. Otherwise, the stuff can get stuck in the cracks and it's really hard to get that out. And the things that stay there longer are going to create the dye to stick longer and dye deeper. So washing is really, really important. And also one of the most tedious, time-consuming parts that I don't love, but I'm learning to just get slow and patient with it because when I try and rush through the rinsing, it just doesn't turn out quite how I want it to. Something I've also just learned is to just surrender to how the dye process turns out. If there's some splotches or whatnot, then I see that as a mark of the beauty of natural dyeing. And I also personally really love doing shibori designs where it's really turns out completely different designs each time, and then you can't really notice if there's splotches and stuff because it's already kind of designed. So I do love that, but when you're trying to get a solid even color, you need to pay a special attention to rinsing and stirring and just really being slow and focused and present with your dye. I personally love to sing a song when I do the stirring in the pot to make sure that I do it long enough. It's easy to just give it a little stir and call it good. I really like to just go along the edge of the fabric and kind of give it a little up and down rinse like this. Go over, grab another edge, and rinse from there. So so that I know that I'm getting all of the creases. And yes, the floor does get really crazy and messy in here. But that's okay. It's all part of it. And then just keep going along the fabric and rinsing it. And I'll do this about 2 or 3 times. This one I'll probably do 3 just because it is a larger piece of fabric. Okay, so we do need to rinse it one more time, but what I do is I just put it up like that, push on the fabric. You don't ever want to wring the fabric, especially after dyeing and such, because it can break the bond of the molecules. So you always just want to push it up against the side of the bucket like so to get as much water out. And I often, especially after I've dyed it and I'm drying it, put it just in the washer here and put it on a spin cycle so that it will easily get all the water out for me. But I don't do that in between rinsing. I just do that when my next step is going to be to hang the fabric, which in this case, after mordanting, I always leave the fabric in a bucket of water so that it stays wetted out and is ready for me to dye. But if you're not ready to dye it right away, you just want to leave it mordanted, you can let it dry and fold it, and it will be ready for you whenever you want to dye, no matter how long you want to wait for that. So there's many options. It's nice to have pieces ready to be mordanted. I just personally do a line, a drop at a time, so I'm always kind of going from one step to the next. Okay, so I've now rinsed it 3 times, and I am just putting it in some lukewarm water, and I'm going to let it sit overnight or until I am ready to dye it. And when you are rinsing out the mordant, you can do cool or lukewarm water. You don't want super hot water because you don't want it to rinse any of it out. But having a little bit of warmth, I find, helps it to rinse out. And it's especially, this is important because with the mordant, it's clear, so it's harder for you to be able to tell if it's rinsed out. Whereas when you're rinsing out the dye, you can obviously see by the color of the dye. So yay, that is all for mordanting. Now prepare for dyeing. So this is me using the mordant pot for the second time. You can see that it is murky compared to this fresh pot, which is okay. The color will change, and some of it is just because of the leftover residue from my past dyes that I didn't do a super great job at cleaning. But what you do is just take about 50% of what you normally would use to mordant. So for this case, it would have been 10% of my weight of fabric, and that would have been about 115 grams. So instead of that, I put in about 55, so roughly half, because there will still be mordant left in here from the first one. And I will use this pot a 3rd time, and the 3rd time I'll probably do about 30% or so. And something that I do between is take this and I scoop out any little fibers like that you can see, just so that it is a little bit cleaner and doesn't create any splotches, or yeah, just doesn't prevent the dye from uptaking right.